I would like to talk to you about some of the work, and so I'm sort of standing aside. Talk about the research I've been working with Dr. Zhang of the East West Center. Unfortunately, Dr. Zhang cannot come to this meeting today because of his schedule, but thanks to the kind understanding of the organizer, Dr. Wu, I'm happy to present a paper on his behalf today. So the title of our research is called Environmental Security and its Implications for China's Foreign Relations. That's a very, very broad and ambitious topic. Now, in terms of the outline of the presentation, I would try to be brief, and in terms of introduction, I would talk about what motivated us to start this research. And next, I will talk about the conceptual overview of what is environmental security to begin with. And then we'll sort of identify some of the areas of environmental security concerns for China and its neighbors, and to discuss that a little bit in the context of climate change. And finally, we will identify some of the avenues in which China may be able to contribute to environmental security. Also, as an introduction, the summer of 2010, as many of you know, marked an important milestone for China. On July 10th, China already, the world's largest carbon emitter since 2007, became the world's largest energy consumer. And in August, of course, China again made a world headline when it overtook Japan as the world's second largest economy. So we know China's economy remains robust. And at the same time, as Dr. Joanna mentioned, the China's economy still needs a lot of energy. For instance, in 2009, China used about 46% of the world's total coal use. So China's energy, despite the initiatives in addressing some of the energy intensities, and also to expand the renewable energy uses, that it still needs a lot of energy use. So really, how China addresses these environmental security issues arising from its energy demand and resources demand has a decisive implication for its foreign relations. So that's sort of what we said. Okay, let's look at some of the so next is what is an environmental security? What is this notion? And I have a little quote here. It says, it seems virtually impossible to agree on an unambiguous definition of environmental security. So it's a very broad and very sort of ill-defined, there are many definitions. But we know that this might be very rudimentary for some of you who are experts on environmental security. But we know that the social and political implications of environmental issues, for instance, has been concerns for many years. And contemporary sort of discussions on environmental security nexus emerged as an antithesis to sort of Cold War mentality of the military threat as the sole source of national security threat. And so the earlier notion stressed on this intersections for environmental degradation in leading to security. So environmental degradation is leading to, say, military instabilities, or of the military, say, activities leading to environmental degradation and so forth. So the earlier notion was mostly on the state level of concerns. And then came sort of human-centered approach in about late 1990s, where it says, no, environmental security does not equal an absence of military conflict. It's actually a human-centered approach. And in that process, that the people's vulnerability to, say, environmental degradation must be reduced. So this is the concept of the process of environmental security. Now, putting this all into the context of China's foreign relations, what does it mean? Or what are some of the complicating factors for discussing this in the context of China's foreign relations? Now, we all know that in response to say, China's rising influence, China's rising economic influence, one of the key doctrines that was adapted by China is that of peaceful development, that we do not, that Chinese government said we do not present threat to these outsiders. At the same time, there's this continued sort of suspicion or continued sort of wary sort of perception in China from the outsiders that China does pose a threat to this international community. So this dichotomy is really important when discussing this environmental security. It's because, say, to what extent China addresses environmental security issues, or to what extent it ignores environmental security concerns, really needs to look at who is evaluating from what perspective, and that needs a lot of evaluation. So for this, we looked at, to illustrate this, we have taken this China's recent carbon intensity commitment as one of the ways to illustrate this tension. And in this paper, we discuss is this China's recent commitment to 40 to 45% reduction relative to 2005 level by 2020, an ambitious goal or business as usual. So this sort of tension of, is China doing enough to address the environmental security issues, or is China just pretending that it is addressing the environmental issues? It can be seen from this point. And Dr. Zhang has written a separate paper talking in depth about this issue. So having said that, where are the areas of environmental security concerns? For that, we have looked at 4 regions, and first of them is the Northeast Asia. Now, Northeast Asia shares a very long history of conflict and mutual problem, as well as mutual dialogue and collaboration in recent years. In particular, acid rain is an area where a fair amount of institutional building has taken place, and as Ms. Daitin has mentioned last night, that acid rain poses a great threat to, say, land irrigation and sort of crop growth and so forth in China. And this is an interesting case study, it's because it sort of shows how China's stances has gradually shifted from that of the initial reluctance to sort of partnership in later years. So the history of collaboration on this acid rain started around 1980s when Korean scientists and Japanese scientists started to see that it's their acid deposition are actually coming from China. The China's initial response was they did not want to admit officially that it was the case, but they say, okay, we can participate in the scientific research first. So they started to collaborate on scientific research when the government officially did not admit that it was their fault. And then came around 1992 when Chinese government officially admitted that it was their contribution. And what they did, what the Chinese government did later is that it joined the regional monitoring network on an unofficial basis. First, they said, well, we're willing to join, but we'll join on an unofficial level so they can exchange information. Then came 1998, December, that it joined as an official member. And when the government joined as an official member, it actually became one of the active members of the regional monitoring network, because China saw the benefit in having the monitoring network and that technical assistance from the network. So there's an interesting case study where China might be initially reluctant to, say, join in regional collaboration, but eventually it would move to more, if presented in a right framework, would join and would actively participate in the network. And also another important sort of insight from this collaboration is that whether a regional, say, environmental regime works or not, does not depend solely on whether China participates or not. There are other factors that makes it difficult, whether it be a financial sort of shortages or, say, rivalry between other countries, including Japan or Korea. So those are other factors that make regional collaboration difficult in Northeast Asian regions, and these must be addressed and together with, say, China's participation in the market and environmental security issues. Next one is in the Southeast Asian region. For Southeast Asian region, one of the most difficult challenges facing is that of water resources management, and in particular, Mekong River water resource management is a big issue. And Mekong River supplies about water to about 80 million people downstream in the requirement states, and those downstream requirement states of Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam have joined together and made a Mekong River Commission in 1995 to look at this issue. And China currently plans to build about, so as part of its hydroelectric development program, China plans to build about 15 hydroelectric plants along the Mekong River. And that is going to pose a great threat to, say, fishery resources or sedimentations or irrigation water downstream. So this has really a lot of concerns for the downstream nations. But since Mekong River Commission's inception in 1995, China, along with Myanmar, have only participated on an official level. And that has really caught international criticism that China is not participating in these commissions officially. Now, the recent years has seen some of the shifts, the gradual shift in China's official stance towards this regional collaboration in the Mekong River. And particularly this year, in April 2010, there was a Mekong River Commission for the first time held its summit meeting in Thailand in April, where China's vice foreign minister participated, and to identify some of the avenues which China is willing to participate in. China is willing to collaborate with the region resources management, and one of that is China is willing to participate within the framework, not within the framework of the Mekong River Commission per se, but within the framework of, say, ASEAN+3 platform, or to address infrastructure challenges, or to say disaster management training. These are sort of the avenues in which Chinese government is willing to collaborate with the downstream requirement states. And another important thing is that there was a severe drought in the spring of 2010, where Chinese government, for the first time, shared the dry season hydrological data with the Mekong River Commission states. It has never happened before, but it was on an emergency basis because it's such a severe drought in the season. And another important step that the Chinese government has taken is that they have, for the first time, invited the Mekong River Commission member states to visit Yunnan province to see those hydroelectric dams. I see some smiling. Yes, it invited for the first time, and to show them the design of the dams and the plans of them, to try to make sure, to convince the downstream state that this wasn't meant to be affecting the environment. So this is, I think it's an interesting case study also, is because it tends to show some of the collaboration, some of the future sort of partnership that would be needed in time of, say, climate change. China shares a lot of water resources with a lot of countries and foreign nations. And in the future, whether the Chinese government feels comfortable or not, it needs to start to share information if they want to present itself as a country that is leading a peaceful development. So it's an interesting case study. And The third region is that Himalayan region, and I know there's going to be an excellent paper that's coming in the afternoon on this, so I'm going to be fairly short with them, looking forward to listening to it. But Himalayan region really poses a great threat to environmental security, human security, food security in the region. And I guess particularly challenge for this region is that, say, state of Bhutan, state of Nepal, those countries rank very low on the, say, Human Development Index. So they are one of the more vulnerable states and also some of the minority populations. So in order to address their adaptation issues, China has to take more of the locally sensitive way of adaptation framework. And as mentioned, as mentioned earlier today, that China tend to focus on state level human security paradigms. But I guess in the future, if you really need to address these issues, that it needs to take, say, framework from a more local level to address local needs. So it would challenge that state level paradigm of human security. I'm going very quickly to different regions, and the fourth region is that of Africa. Now, Sino-African ties have expanded rapidly in, let's say, last decades. For instance, in 2005, the Sino-African trade was about $4 billion US, and it has increased to about above $100 billion in 2008. So, in terms of all of trade, and it's expanded in terms of investment, and it's expanded in terms of resources needed, it's expanded as well. Africa supplies about 30% of China's crude oil imports. So this oil diplomacy has caught a lot of attention. Now, in terms of this oil diplomacy in Africa, the human rights or diplomatic implications of China's ties with the non-democratic states has gained a lot of attention within different discourses. But at the same time, its impact on, say, environment, China's invading Africa, and its impact on environmental security per se has been fairly limited. And this is because the data is very limited on China's business dealing with Africa. And this, say, data limitation with a need for transparency, it has been allowing both sides to others. So perhaps we may say that environmental security is one of the neglected areas of Sino-African relationship. And this is important because China has tremendous opportunities to address Africa's challenges for poverty regulation. China has an enormous potential to bring African states like poverty by, say, helping build critical infrastructure, or helping them set up some of the special economic zone that work in China, for instance. So these are some of the opportunities that China presents to Africa. And in order for China to present to the international community that it is treading the way of peaceful development, it needs to start thinking about, say, how to include civil society organizations into decision makings, or to open those informations to the international community. So these are some of the regional concerns. And we're talking in terms of climate change. And I think Dr. Joanna has talked a lot of the potential implications of climate change in China's regional security, so I'm going to speak on that. And if I can add a few more thoughts. One would be that the potential solutions adopted by China, for instance, might have implications to increase some of the international anxiety. Now, one of them is, there are two examples that comes to my mind. One is that of China's future nuclear power development. And China recently has shifted, since about 2004, has shifted from sort of low-key nuclear development to one of the more expanded and rapid nuclear power development. China currently has about 11 nuclear reactors with a total capacity of about 9 gigawatts. but China plans to increase that to 70 gigawatts in 10 years. So they're planning to build about 28 reactors in the next decade. So that's a very rapid rate of expansion. And there are already concerns as to China may not have the human resources capacity needed to address the safety issues, for instance. So for that, China really needs to work with an international audience, with international community, if it is to alleviate some of the added anxiety that's caused by this expanded nuclear development. And another is, of course, that of rare metals, as Dr. Juno mentioned, that a lot of clean technologies are now made in China. So there's a lot of need for these rare earth metals, and there has been sort of analysis as to maybe the Chinese government wants to invite those manufacturing industries domestically, and that is why they are curtailing some of the exports at the moment. But this is really a short-sighted approach. If China suddenly cuts supply and does not negotiate with the buyers, say, United States or Japan or Europe, this will cost China a diplomatic image in the future. So this is some of the added anxiety, perhaps, within the context of climate change. So finally, how can China contribute to environmental security? This is again going to be very, very basic, perhaps. One of the ways China can contribute to environmental security is to address domestic pollution issues first, and to address domestic emission reduction needs. And following Dr. Zhang's earlier recommendations, this paper also recommends that China should take energy saving goals in the next 5-year plan as stringent as the 11th 5-year plan. And in terms of decommission of inefficient coal pipeline that is being planned, currently China plans to decommission 50 megawatts or below the fire power plants, but the paper recommends that doubling the capacity or even quadrupling the capacity to 100 megawatts or 200 megawatts, so that more of an inefficient coal fire plant will be retiring in the future. And the second is, of course, fostering regional dialogue and partnership. So China really, in the future, China will need to open up some of the data, will need to join in the dialogue if they are to address the environmental security issues in the region, because it is not something that China can continue to hide from the outsiders. And the third is the response of the international community. Now this is, I don't know what you all think about this, is that we tend to think that there is a need for practical attitude by the international community. What do we mean by that? As an outsider, it's very easy to criticize China for the shortcomings of this policy. But at the same time, without recognizing some of the, say, positive improvements that have taken place, or addressing the issues in a framework that means something to China's domestic government. Otherwise, it is not constructive to continue to live in China. So the international community really needs to take a practical approach and say, well, the extent to which environmental quality improves should matter the most. And the extent to which people's vulnerability are reduced should matter the most. And that should be the ultimate goal. In the manner in which China addresses, or in the order in which China addresses, should not matter as much as the actual output, which is the reduction of vulnerability. So for that, it is perhaps important that China and the regional partners can identify, say, an area that is easier for them to start collaborating. Maybe it's a scientific research first. Maybe it's a disaster management sort of preparedness first. So start to identify the areas that are of mutual benefit, and then build on that
collaboration. I think these points are very important and should be to address.